Thank you everyone for joining us here. We have Professor S Irfan Habib in our midst. Professor S Irfan Habib has worked in the area of history of science as well as political history. After teaching history for a few years, he joined the National Institute of Science, Technology and Development Studies, New Delhi. He spent more than 30 years looking at the intellectual and institutional foundations of modern science and technology during the colonial phase in India. Within this framework, he began by investigating the role of dissemination of modern science through the local Indian languages and how a language like Urdu would transform itself from a language of poetry to a language skilled in communicating modern science. He later moved to the question of the interface between local Indian knowledge traditions and modern knowledge which came along with colonization. In his more recent work, he has raised some fundamental questions centering around diversities of knowledge and cultural practices in India and elsewhere around the world. Besides a large number of papers, he has also co-edited and authored with Dhruv Rana several books, including Situating the History of Science, Dialogues. He has also co-authored Domesticating Modern Science in Colonial India. His book To Make the Deaf Hear, Ideology and Program of Bhagat Singh and His Comrades, has been translated into several Indian languages like Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, Punjabi and Bengali. His other book is Jihad or Ittihad, Religious Orthodoxy and Modern Science in Contemporary Islam. He recently put together a volume on Indian nationalism, the essential writings, and another one called Inqilab Bhagat Singh on religion and revolution. He has also coordinated the South and Southeast Asian section of History of Science in UNESCO's prestigious History of Humanity series. Till recently, he held the Maulana Azad chair at the National University of Education Planning and Administration, New Delhi. His recent book is Maulana Azad, A Life, that focuses on his understanding of Islam and also nationalism. Besides being a Fulbright scholar, he has been a visiting professor at several universities like Humboldt University Berlin, University of Cambridge, University of Calcutta, State University of New York, Maison de Sciences de Home Paris, MIT Cambridge, Mars and others. I hope that this lecture would be a very much engaging one, and I request Professor Habib to come to the dais and take forward this lecture. Thank you.
Let me begin by thanking Nalsar for giving me this opportunity to talk about my recent book. And I am particularly grateful to Ayush, who got in touch with me. And last few days have been hectic because, as you know, the new book on something like Azad will obviously attract some attention and will make you run around. So I've been doing a bit the last few days. But coming to Nalsar was one very attractive opportunity to come and talk to young people like you and to talk about the book. And let me begin by explaining why this book and why Azad. One factor is very obvious because I held this Maulana Azad chair for about 10 years. While I was there, I felt some sort of attraction towards the man while I was reading about him. As a student of history, I have been aware of Azad's prominent role as a scholar and as a great nationalist. But there was nothing in detail which I had time to go through because I was engaged in other things. So when I was there, I tried to read, try to understand him for some time. Finally, I decided that there is time not because I hold this chair and I owe him a book because I hold this chair. I decided to work because in the past few years, one has seen a large number of people who are deriding Azad, questioning his role in freedom struggle, and if you go through social media, go through YouTube channels, not that one has to take them seriously, but they have a role. I may not take seriously, you may not take seriously, but there are a large number of people who watch and listen and read what is circulated there. So that made me a bit more serious about the project. I said, let me do something which has not been done before. Last good book on Maulana Azad came out in 1990. That was by Professor V. N. Datta, who was a highly respected historian, a liberal historian of India, passed away recently, a couple of years ago. And another book came out in 2003, which is little different, which talks about Maulana's role in combating communal politics. So that is focused on his political profile, which is important, but doesn't really talk much about anything else. And that was done by a friend of ours who unfortunately passed away during COVID, Rizwan Qasar. Some people may know him. He was a very serious scholar. He used to teach in Jamia, was a professor there. Now, while looking at all this, I thought, let us look at Maulana and his life, his profile, his contribution, things which are not very well known. For example, this book particularly, because I am talking about the book, this book particularly deals with his early life. And that early life is not just important because one has to talk about somebody's early life in a biography. It is important because it had a huge bearing on his career later on, because whatever he went through in his family and in his earlier days. Second is his engagement with Islam, which is important for me because, and it is important for all of us, because whatever is happening to Islam, not only in India but globally. And what was the way Maulana Azad tried to engage with Islam? So that I have dealt with in detail. Third is, again, a very important issue, which is an issue of identity, nationalism. Today, we hear this talk about nationalism all the time. We dub the people anti-national amongst our own fellow citizens. We define nationalism the way we want, feel convenient. So, what was Maulana Azad's role while he tried to define nationalism in his own time during freedom struggle? Fourth is an important chapter, which again has not been dealt with in detail by anybody before. Is a chapter on his book called Ghubar-e-Khatir. This is a book based on epistolary essays written in Ahmednagar Fort prison. And this book was written when Nehru was writing his Discovery of India at the same prison for 3 years in Ahmednagar Fort. Now, we all know about Discovery of India because it was written in English. It was accessible to people. And Nehru, being a very prolific writer and obviously a much known figure, even in his own lifetime, even before independence. So we all know about that. But this Ghubar-e-Khatir was not talked about because it was in Urdu. And there was no decent translation till about 15, 20 years ago. One translation came out, which is a really bad one. And last chapter is on Maulana's role as a Minister for Education, Science and Culture from 1947 to 1958 till he died. And this is, for me, a foundational decade of the 1950s, a decade which saw the birth of large number of institutions of science, of culture, of education. Lots of policies were formulated during this phase. Constituent Assembly debates took place during this phase. And Maulana Azad was a very eager and active participant in those debates.
So what all he did, so this comes out in the last chapter. Now, I will not talk in detail about the early phase because that may not interest you very much. But I will come to a phase where he talks about Islam. Islam for him, what it did, there is a famous work of his on Islam called Tarjuman al-Quran, translation of Quran, commentary on Quran, which was published in 1930. He started working on Tarjuman al-Quran at a very young age, in 1916-17. Because of his political profile, because he used to bring out a paper like Al-Hilal, which was a paper which was seditious according to the British and spoke against anti-imperialism. And so 1912 to 1914, this paper actually wrote a lot against against imperialism, and there is something which you need to know, that Maulana was declared as one of the most dangerous persons in India by the British in their files. You can file. I found those archives. Now, why? He was not even part of the freedom struggle. He has not even joined the Congress party till then. It happened all because of his seditious writing against the British, because those writings were so provocative, so much full of anti-imperialist sentiment, that the British had to declare him as the most dangerous person. Now, when all this was happening, he began work on Tarjuman al-Quran. His house was raided. All the files of those commentaries and translations which Maulana was doing, they were taken away by the British. And this happened thrice. And Maulana had to write this Tarjuman al-Quran fourth time. He had to recollect memory and write again. So this was the process how he began engaging with Quran. Finally, he completed the translation in 1930. Again, when he was in a prison in Meerut district jail. Now, when he's looking at Quran, and this is something which I want to raise, which is important for me in today's India, not only for Islam, but even for people who are not Muslims, even others, they have to really understand how Maulana tried to look at, and especially those who are deriding him every other day, to which I referred in the beginning. He says that Islam is not a supremacist religion. This is something which is accusation made against Islam all the time. And I don't think it's wrongly made. There are people who take this sort of position, that Islam is the best of religions in the world. Maulana says, no, that's not true. Islam is one of the religions amongst many. And then he says that I don't believe that any religion is not monotheistic. Even Hinduism is monotheistic religion. Even people who are believers in Hinduism believe that there is one God. The Devis and Devtas, the Murtis which you find in the temples, that also Maulana justified. He said these are for concentration. They are used to concentrate in their devotion, while the belief in one God continues. You ask anybody who is a believer in Hinduism, in various creeds of Hinduism, because Hinduism itself is diverse, all of them will say the Creator is one. So he began with this premise that all religions are monotheistic. Then he puts forward a comparative perspective. He compares Islam with Christianity, with Hinduism, with Judaism, and even with atheists like Bertrand Russell. What were his views about religion as an atheist? And so he brings in all these people to understand all these religions and creeds and philosophies, even atheistic philosophies like Charvak and Sankhya and all that. He brings in philosophies as well to give a comparative account of Islam. So this is something which Maulana Azad tried to do in the context where communal politics was at its peak. So this is something which you have to keep in mind. He is writing all this when Muslim League and other communalists, Hindu as well as Muslim, both communalists were trying to propagate a sectarian version of their religions. And in the midst of all this, Maulana is trying to create his own world, which is composite, which talks about togetherness, which talks about looking at all religions with a comparative perspective, providing respect and space to all of them. So this was now the Muslims of that time, large number of them, particularly who were aligned with the Muslim League, they called Maulana's Tarjuman al-Quran Congress's version of Tarjuman al-Quran. And they forget that Maulana began working on Tarjuman al-Quran before he joined Congress party. Now, this is what I have tried to bring out in the book also. Because he began working on it in 1916-17 when he was in exile near Ranchi in a village where the Britishers had pegged him off for 3 years. He couldn't come out. And that's where he was working on Tarjuman al-Quran. Congress party he joins in 1920. He meets Gandhi in January 1920. That's when he joins the Congress party. So this is a charge which is absolutely baseless. Maulana continued to work before he joined the Congress party, before he became a formal nationalist leader aligned with the party. So this was his own view about Islam. Where did he get that view? That he got from his own family. His own father, who was a scholar, Maulana Khairuddin, who was a Sufi, who was a very Puritan scholar. Maulana disagreed with his father on so many counts. His disagreement went to an extent that as a young man, he gave up religion altogether. And this is another aspect which not many people know. That for 7-8 years, Maulana was close to atheism. He just forgot about Islam, and he has written that I didn't feel like even praying. I didn't feel like saying my namaz. Didn't feel like observing a fast during Ramadan. So this 7-8 years phase was a phase of Maulana, which we may not call it atheism, but surely agnosticism. He was surely an agnostic. He was surely skeptical about Islam, about his faith. Then he studied a lot during that phase. And finally, he comes back to Islam with a changed perspective completely. So what the Islam he got, which is reflected in Tarjuman al-Quran, is an Islam which he got through his own understanding and reading of different religions and different philosophies all over the world, from wherever he could get. Now, again, there is a charge leveled against him, and this is something which I wanted to question again. That Maulana was actually an illiterate. He was made education minister and minister for science. That is why we are into such a mess. That is one. There is a video which is circulated on YouTube. People don't realize that he didn't really have a certificate or a degree or a university. Surely he didn't. The point is, he was an autodidact, a man who taught himself. He taught himself philosophy. He taught himself different religions. He taught himself different languages, from Arabic to Persian to Urdu, because Urdu was not his mother tongue. His mother tongue was Arabic. He was born in Arabia. His mother was an Arab. He came to India when he was 7 or 8 years old. And after coming here, he learned other languages. Then he taught himself English. He never spoke English, but he read English. He taught himself French. And he read Robespierre not Robespierre, actually, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau in French. And this is something which I'm not speaking just from nowhere. This is all documented, which I have tried to bring out in the book also. There are his colleagues who were in prison who say that we found Maulana carrying French books with him. And he used to read all these French philosophers through original French. Similarly, English. So this is something which the charge against him is awful, because he is somebody who learned so much from so many places, from all over, through his own. Now his paper Al Hilal, which was again an anti-imperialist paper, but it had a column, a regular column, where Maulana used to write on science. Again, not many people are aware of it because nobody talks about it. And I saw some issues where he is writing about X-ray. The X-ray was not something very known in those times, 1912, 1913. He wrote an interesting piece on Marie Curie. So he picked things which he found interesting and wanted to convey to people through Urdu, the people who could speak in Urdu and read in Urdu. So this is his own interest in science, in knowledge, in modern science particularly. And this is a challenge to all those people in Islam today, the mullahs who talk about all sorts of things, of contradiction between Islam and modern science and modern knowledge, etc. So this is a rebuttal of all those which Maulana has put forward. And this book brings out all that in large detail. What all, I can't talk about detail in one lecture, but there are lots of things which I have tried to bring about. Second thing which is important in the context of Islam is again the whole issue of identity. And this is linked to the issue of nationalism, because he carries that whole idea of Islam and identity as defined by Islam in the chapter on nationalism. And he says that what is this Muslim League propaganda that you need to create a nation in the name of Islam? Why don't you go back to the history of Islam and learn what Prophet Muhammad did when he created the first Muslim nation? And he says that in the 7th century, when Prophet Muhammad had to leave Mecca because his life was under threat, and migrated to Medina. And Medina was a city inhabited mostly by the Jews, Jew traders, Jew businessmen, people who were rich. Most of them were Jews, 90%. He goes and takes refuge in the midst of the Jews to save his life. And there he declares his first Islamic nation in the name of Islam. Now what was it? It had the support of Jews, of Quraysh tribe, of Ansars, and all sorts of other Muslims, new Muslims who were just converted 10 years, 15 years back. All of them got together and created a nation in the name of Islam. Acha. What should I do? This one? Okay. So he created, he believed that if Prophet could create a nation in the name of Islam on the basis of collaboration between Jews and Muslims, new Muslims who have just converted to this new faith, then why Muslims today in India can't create a nation along with Hindus? What is the problem? That is an example set by the Prophet. So go by Prophet's life, go by Islam's history. Why should Muslim League or Mr. Jinnah ask for a nation in the name of Islam separately? We can form a nation together. So this was the main argument which Maulana began against the Muslim League propaganda. Other things came in, but this was something which he used from Islam. He wrote a piece in 1927 called Islam and Nationalism. In his paper Al-Hilal, which was banned by the British in 1914, then Maulana tried to revive it in 1927. He couldn't revive it very much because he had no time. But few issues came out. One issue carried a very important article by him, which I have used here, Islam and Nationalism. And it was important in those times, it is important even now. Here, Maulana tries to do something very interesting. And I'm saying this because it is important for our contemporary India, particularly the way, the sort of life we are living in, the sort of politics we are facing today all over India, the sort of issues which are being raised in the name of nation and nationalism by a section of our own people. So in that context, these writings of Maulana are very, very important. Now he says, first he tries to define, makes a distinction between patriotism and nationalism. He said patriotism is something else. We all need to be patriots. But nationalism is important only in the context of our fight against the foreign rule. The British, the alien, the other. So it is important in that context. We all are born actually patriots. First we are patriots for our mohalla, where we are born, in our home where we are born, then we are in the region where we belong to, in the district we belong to, and then the country we belong to. So this is a very natural thing for any citizen of any country, that he has to be a patriot. So that way he makes a distinction that patriotism is something else. It has to be with us all the time for all nationals, irrespective of caste, religion, culture, whatever. And ultimately, he says, ultimately, you have to come to humanity. So this is a Tagorean argument. Tagore in 1916 wrote a lot against the whole idea of nationalism. While he traveled to Japan and America and South America, everywhere, and those lectures were published in 1916 on nationalism, where Tagore gives priority to humanity. Humanity is more important than anything else. Now, Maulana has not reached that level, because Tagore is Tagore. So Tagore defines in his own way. But Maulana goes very close to Tagore and believes that ultimate objective of anybody should be not patriotism, not nationalism, but humanity. We are all humans. We have to be humans first, then only we can be nationals. Only then we can be patriots to a particular country. So you need to be human first. So then he gives a detailed explanation of what humanity means for him. So this is something which Maulana tried to do in the context where there was bloodshed in the name of Islam, in the name of Hinduism, in the name of religion. Because we need to keep in mind that when he's writing all this, like this article came out in 1927. 1920s is an awful decade, because it saw a huge turmoil at different levels. Like it began with the non-cooperation movement. It ended with Chauri Chaura in 1922. Chauri Chaura led to huge violence all over India, communal violence. In 1925, we have RSS being founded. In late 1920s, we have Tablighi Jamaat being founded. In 1925, we have Communist Party of India being founded. So I'm listing this because these are very important things which happened in 1920s. So 20s is a very important decade for us. And in 27, when Maulana is writing all this, we have communal violence all over. And in the middle of all this, Maulana is trying to see the world differently. Muslims and Hindus differently. Not as as divisive human beings, as people belonging to two competing religions, but as one community, as one nation. So this whole chapter on nationalism is full of that. Second thing, which we talk about and we hear about, which comes out in this section, is that it was actually Muslim League, it was Maulana Azad alone who was fighting for united India as a Muslim. Rest of the Muslims were actually with Muslim League. And this is something which Muslim League tried to instill in the minds of the people, calling Maulana Azad a showboy of the Congress, agent of the Hindus. These are all Jinnah's words for him. A despicable human being. Maulana never responded to any of these charges leveled by Jinnah. Not even once. Never didn't go beyond civic boundaries. Always remained within. He ignored whatever he said. He just didn't respond. But what was the objective? Why was Jinnah using this language for Maulana Azad? He was using this because he wanted to prove that it is only Maulana Azad who is actually with the Congress party. Rest of the Muslims are with us, which is not a fact. I will give you one example, and people generally are not familiar with that. And one name, nobody is familiar with that name at all. Even among historians, people don't know about him. In 1940, in March 1940, Muslim League passed a Lahore resolution for Pakistan. This was a resolution passed for the first time, where Pakistan was named as a nation by Muslim League. Now, a large section of Muslims in India disagreed with the Muslim League. They all got together, and there were sections of Muslims who belonged to, there is a community, like today we call that, much simpler version, which you hear in newspapers a lot, Pasmanda Muslim, backward Muslims. Ajlaf, the word, not Ashraf. Ashraf were Sayyids, Sheikhs, Pathans, privileged Muslims. Muslim League represented a section of this Ashraf, who were zamindars, who were professionals, who were businessmen. And the Muslim League instilled fears into the minds of all these people that if you don't agree or partition, then you will be deprived of all your privileges in the Hindu majority India. And the British supported them all through. Because for me, it was a collaborative project between the British and the Muslim League, the whole Pakistan project, which comes out very clearly. From 1906, when Muslim League was founded, till 1947, when Pakistan was created. The first experiment took place in 1905, when partition took place in the name of religion, East Bengal and West Bengal, which was undone later on. But experiment did take place when Hindus and Muslims were divided. And then it continued all through the 4 or 5 decades. Now, in this period, Maulana came out very clearly that the resolution which the Muslim League has passed is not actually the voice of the people of India, the Muslims of India. It is the voice of a section of Muslim population. In April 1940, just next month, there used to be one and this is a name which I wanted to share with you. There used to be one Sindhi Muslim leader called Allah Bakhsh Sabru. Allah Bakhsh Sabru was a chief minister of Sindh at that time, and a vehement opponent of communal politics. Very serious opponent of Muslim League, challenger of Muslim League. He organized a huge Azad Muslim conference in Delhi just next month after Muslim League passed this resolution. And in that conference, the reports which we find in archives says that close to 75 to 1 lakh Muslims gathered in Delhi. Now, who are these Muslims in such huge numbers in those times? Muslim League decided to boycott, show black flags to Allah Bak Samru and the leaders collected over there, but they didn't have courage to come and even come close to the conference venue. Number was so huge. So, which means that there was a huge number of Muslim population which was against Muslim League's idea of Pakistan. When people say that Maulana Azad failed in this project of keeping India united, and I've tried to question that. He said Maulana Azad, if you see in actual terms, failed to keep India united. Of course, he couldn't, because it was not his own sole project. There were so many other actors involved in it. But he did convince a huge section of Muslims to stay back in India. Despite fears, despite fear-mongering of the Muslim League, despite so many challenges which they faced. And I give this example of Western Uttar Pradesh, UP. District from Saharanpur to Meerut, Moradabad, Bijnor, Rampur, all these areas. If you go by demography today, the Muslim population in UP is 19%. And the Muslim population in these districts of Western UP, which is adjacent to Punjab and Haryana today, which was Punjab earlier, is 26%. This is one. This is demographic this thing. Then I try to check with a large number of people in that area coming from the backward communities, like Ansari Biradari. If you go and talk to them, which I did, and I talked to many of them, you will not find a single family, at least I couldn't find, who have anybody from the family living across the border. Nobody crossed the border. Nobody went. They're all here. Families like mine are divided. They all left in those times. Many of them who feared. My parents and my grandparents, they didn't go, but there were lots number of extended family which went away. There were so many like that. So, the contribution of Maulana Azad and Darul Uloom, Deoband. Today we talk about Deoband, which is, they're known for frivolous fatwas, which do indulgent all the time. Very non-serious. We don't even take them seriously. But in those times, there were people like Hussain Ahmad Madani, was grandfather of today's Mahmood Madani, who went to meet Amit Shah Dibofar yesterday. His grandfather, Hussain Ahmad Madani. He wrote I think you need to read who are interested in this whole issue. He wrote a booklet in 1938 called Composite Nationalism, Muttahada Qawmiyat in Urdu. Now, this was written, and he was one of the main collaborators of Maulana Azad, main strength in this region, because most of the Darul Uloom had impact among Pasmanda Muslims, not among the Sayyids and Sheikhs and Pathans. Only the Pasmanda Muslim community, the Momen Biradari, the Ansari Biradari, the Baba family, and artisans, they were all part of Darul Uloom influence. And they all stayed back. And today's Muslim population, majority of Muslim population belongs to this section, at least in Uttar Pradesh. South India was not affected at all, hardly. But this part, which was close to Punjab, this particular section didn't go at all. This was a victory of Maulana Azad and his collaborators like Allah Bak Samru, like Darul Uloom Deoband. They all convinced the Muslims, despite the fear-mongering of the Muslim League, to stay back and choose India as their home, and which they did, and continue to live here even today. Now, today, what is being said, that partition today in communal politics, it is an incomplete partition project. People who didn't go should actually leave. They don't realize that these people didn't leave India in the times where it was difficult to live. Despite that, they opted for India as their home. So this is something which is Maulana Azad's success. Maulana Azad in collaboration with a large number of people who are involved in this project, who defined composite nationalism in a way where there was space for communities across religion. Hussain Ahmad Madni, which I just talked about, he had a debate with Allama Iqbal. Allama Iqbal was a great philosopher, great poet, no doubt about that. But he was somebody who is full of contradictions. He and is full of ambiguities. In 1938, he speaks about Islamic nationalism. And Hussain Ahmad Madni responds to that by writing Composite Nationalism. They had a very bitter exchange, and Allama Iqbal called him names. All sorts of things were said about Hussain Ahmad Madni. He called him, you may not be familiar with the name, but in Islamic history, there is a character called Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab was the inveterate enemy of Prophet. And so Allama Iqbal called Hussain Ahmad Madni Abu Lahab. So that is the extent of antipathy he had for somebody who talked of composite nationalism. So this was the time and when Maulana was trying to create a united India. Now, Allama Iqbal, again, I love his poetry. I love the man as a great philosopher. He was actually one of the trained philosophers trained in Heidelberg in Germany, who did his PhD in philosophy from there, came back. So he was a formally trained philosopher. Maulana Azad was not even a trained philosopher. He was with a degree in philosophy from the West. Despite that, you find ambiguities in him. Now what he says, Islam cannot believe in territorial nationalism. Islam is a universal religion. This is Allama Iqbal. So you cannot define nationalism in terms of territories. So what Hussain Ahmad Madni is saying is un-Islamic. Now in this book, I try to argue that if you are, as a great philosopher, you are saying that Islam is not territorial and Islam is beyond boundaries, then how do you explain the existence of 50 plus nations in the world? Why so many Arab nations? Forget about Islamic nations, Arab nations. If nationality is not so important and Islam is predominant, why did Bangladesh come into existence? This is something which Maulana Azad challenged in 1946-47. Maulana Azad is on record saying that this division of India into Pakistan and India will not exist for more than 25 years. Pakistan will not stay together for more than 25 years. It was exactly 25 years in 71 that Bangladesh was created. Which means that language and culture took precedence over religion. The same people who divided the country in the name of Islam had to divide it again in the name of religion and culture. So this is something which Maulana tried to explain to people in those times. People didn't listen, and there are his speeches where he tries to explain that people change religion several times during their lives, but not language, not culture. So this is something very, very unique, and this is something which somebody like Jamaluddin Afghani, who had a great, I don't know whether you have heard this name. Jamaluddin Afghani was a peripatetic Islamic thinker and pan-Islamist who fought against imperialism, who was actually, he called himself Afghani, but he was actually from Asadabad in Iran. He used this word Afghani because he was a Shia, and he didn't want to project himself as a Shia in the Sunni world. So to gain acceptability, he called himself Jamaluddin Afghani, while he was actually Irani Shia scholar. So he came to India in 1880s, about whom I have written in my another book also, so many papers as well, in the context of science, because he was a man of modern science, modern learning, advocated all that. And he talked of anti-imperialist fight. And Maulana Azad was greatly impacted by him. His anti-imperialist philosophies. And I have, in this book, I have dealt with in detail how Jamaluddin Afghani talked about Hindu-Muslim unity. When he comes to India in 1880s, a pan-Islamist, you know what he does? He goes to speak in Calcutta, and he's speaking to 300 young Muslims sitting in front of him. He spoke in Persian. Obviously, he didn't know Urdu or Bangla. He's speaking Persian. So people sitting in front of him were those who knew Persian, who could understand him. And he says that you belong, you means you Muslim sitting, there was no Hindu sitting there. You belong to a country which can boast of the invention of zero. So you should be proud of your culture which gave so much to the world. So he's telling the Muslims that be proud of your culture, of your scientific tradition, which is not Islamic, which is actually Hindu tradition. But he says that you belong to India and you need to be proud of what you inherited from your tradition. So he's trying to make a point that you have to fight against the British only when you get together and forget about differences. So Hindus and Muslims, they have to get together to fight against the British. So on that count, he forgets about his pan-Islamism. He knew that in India, pan-Islamism will not work. It is only Hindu-Muslim unity which will work. In a Hindu majority country, you have to talk about togetherness. And fight can take place, a successful fight can take place only when you get together. So this is something which Maulana Azad tried to use, and he was greatly influenced by that. And in his travels also to Egypt and other parts of the world, he met Mustafa Kamil Pasha, who was an Egyptian nationalist leader, who again did the same thing in Egypt. He talked about fight against the British imperialism by co-opting Coptic Christians. Christians and Muslims together can fight against the British. And this is the lesson which Maulana learned, and when he came back to India, he said, he gave this example, that what are you doing going after Muslim League? Go and learn lessons from Kamil Pasha, who is also a Muslim. No, he's putting together a joint front against imperialism by bringing in Christians on the same platform. Because we have a nation, religion doesn't matter. So this is something which I have dealt in detail in this chapter. Last thing, which I think I should close with the last thing, and then we can have some discussion and continue, is a chapter on Ghubare Khatir, which I talked about. Now, what is Ghubare Khatir? Now, this is the book based on epistolary essays, letters he wrote to his friend who was much senior to him in age, but Maulana respected him a lot. And so when he wrote first letter to him, the British said, the rules do not allow that you can write and post letters. This imprisonment doesn't allow you to post letters. So Maulana was very disturbed. But he said, okay, let me continue. He decided to write a letter on any subject which came to his mind. So some are in the form of a letter, some are in the form of essays completely. And there, and I will not talk about all of them, there are 24 of them, but important things which are important in today's context. One is, and interesting also, one is, he talks about, he talks about happiness in one essay. Said, it's very strange that the mullahs, the priests, the pandits, or the philosophers, no, they always keep some sort of a frown on their face, as if a smile or being light-hearted doesn't belong to religious scholarship, as if there is some mismatch between the two. So he tries to explain that. And this is something strange. Why a mullah has to frown all the time? Why can't you laugh? No? And then he brings in Chinese proverbs that the happiest person in the world is who can stay happy, who can keep smiling. No? He brings André Gide, the French Nobel laureate, who again said the same thing, that happiness is a moral responsibility of everyone, because, and moral and social responsibility. If you are not happy, then you spread unhappiness in the environments you live. So it's a beautiful essay which Maulana writes, and I'm just quoting few parts of it. And it just goes on and explains how happiness is important in our lives. Then he goes and writes about, like, one should know that tea played a very important role in his life. And what was that tea? He used to drink white jasmine Chinese tea only. The first cup of tea which he began the day with was at 3:30 in the morning. That was a schedule as a child, which he followed all his life. He used to get up at 3:34 in the morning, and the first cup of tea was at 3:30 or 4. That was his like whole lifetime plan. Now, in this essay on tea, he writes a longish essay, and he says that this tea, which the British brought to India, they call it tea. Actually, it is something else. They went to China, brought some plant from there, and planted here in India and Ceylon, and something grew, and they started using it as tea, which is actually not tea. And then they added milk to it, and then they added sugar to it. So it is actually more of a sharbat than tea. So it's an insult. Don't call it tea, give it some other name. I have no issues, but don't call it tea. Tea should have a color. That color is golden color. And then because for him, tea making and tea drinking was a ritual. And he explains how he used to make tea, and always used to make his own tea himself. And how he used to drink tea. He will say, my cup of tea, immediately when the cup of tea is ready, I will light my cigarette, because he was a chain smoker. And I will see to it that my cup of tea will not end before my cigarette finishes, because I am not that uncivil. I know that my both of them have to go together. And I don't gulp down my tea. I'm not that uncivilized. And he used to have those Russian cups, small Russian cups. So this is a huge essay. Then he says that today, you see, in this country, I can't even invite anybody to have a cup of tea with me, because nobody takes the tea I take. It's only Jawaharlal who has some taste for black tea. But that tea is also, and he uses the word lopchu wopchu. Lopchu is a brand of tea. He said he also takes that lopchu wopchu. There is a black tea. So I don't even invite Jawaharlal for tea. Because he will hardly enjoy the tea I take. But he's the only one who takes black tea without milk and without sugar. But rest of the people take only sharbat. So this is, so I'm just telling you briefly, but if you read, it's an interesting detail about his engagements with tea and how tea is important for him. Then there is a very interesting chapter, the last one, letter, which is the longest, on music. And this is important in the context of Islam. When people talk about Islam, music as un-Islamic, and Maulana gives you the whole history of music in Islam and its importance in his own life. And he says very clearly that if you want to punish me, deprive me of my transistor. Just take away my transistor. But that is enough. It can't be a better punishment for me. So his love for music was that extent. And his own engagement with it began as a child, because he was an accomplished sitar player. He learned sitar for 3 years from Ustad Masita Khan, who was in Calcutta. He used to go to his home quietly because his father was against it, because he was a Sufi, but not a Chishti Sufi order. Chishti Sufi order, music has an important place. In Qadiriya and Naqshbandi Sufi order, these are Puritan Islamic Sufi philosophies. So there was no place for music at all. So Maulana used to quietly disappear for 3 years, spent 2-3 hours, learned sitar. Once he went to Agra and sat in the moonlit night behind the Taj and played sitar the whole night. So this is how the passion he had for music. Now after independence, when he became a minister, he found, when he was listening to All India Radio of those times, he found that the classical music on All India Radio is very substandard, according to him. So he didn't really like, the quality was poor. And Information Broadcasting Ministry was being looked after by Sardar Patel. So Maulana writes a letter, and that letter I have quoted here and I have it with me, a long letter, and where he says, Dear Sardar, you may see it as an interference in your ministry, but I am sorry because I have no other choice, because this is something which I have been listening to. The quality of All India Radio is very poor and we need to do something about it. I have some experience in music, and if you believe that I can be of some help, so kindly send your person in charge who can come to me and I can spend some time with him and guide him how to go about doing it. And don't take it otherwise. It's not an interference. It is just my own interest. And to which Sardar Patel responded with equal respect. And maybe something did really happen. But this is an example I'm giving, how passionate Maulana was about music. And this is a lesson for those mullahs and people who talk about today, that Islam is that the music is Islamic. I don't think you can have a better scholar like Maulana Azad to talk about what is important in Islam. So this is something which Maulana spent time in writing and talking about, and this is something which normally people are not aware of, and besides politics, etc. But this is something which is significant in today's world, which people need to know, and so I have tried to bring that about. Last chapter is on Maulana as a minister. That is like, as I told you in the beginning, the 10 years which he spent as a minister is a foundational decade of India's independence. When institutions came up, there were institutions of art and culture, of science and education, which had to be brought up, which had to be set. Culture particularly was not on the agenda of the British, because for them, India had no culture at all. So there was nothing to be institutionalized. So they didn't do. No institution was founded at all. So Maulana had a huge challenge. So Sahitya Academy came up, Sangeet Natak Academy came up, Lalit Kala Academy came up, Indian Council for Cultural Relations came up, which was Maulana's very favorite sort of subject and issue. So this is something which Maulana did during those early phases. The first IIT Kharagpur came up, to which Maulana went and inaugurated himself with Nehru. IIT Kharagpur, if you go, you will find a plaque in the beginning where you can have Maulana's statement written over there when he inaugurates it, and in their magazine, in their writings, annual reports, etc. Maulana Azad figures regularly. So this was something very, very significant he did. UGC, University Grants Commission. He felt that one need to have a body which controls educational system, higher education particularly. So it went through 3-4 years. So finally, 53 the proposal was given. 1956, finally the University Grants Commission was founded. Whole education policy in the Constitutional Assembly debates, Maulana was one of those significant speakers on most of the issues, like, for example, women's education. He spoke so eloquently in Constituent Assembly debates on equity in education. or not equality, equity in education. Equality is something else. He talked of equity. And similarly, on so many issues of science, on budget, you will be surprised when he took over. The budget for education was just a lakh of rupees, no? Which went up to 30 lakhs or something in those times, which was huge money in those times. Today it is peanuts, but even that money was not available. So this was a challenge which Maulana had to face in those times, and a new India had to be built from scratch after 200 years of exploitation, colonialism, etc., and centuries of deprivation where a section of population was deprived of education. This is where Maulana tried to bring out in so many of his speeches. From 47 onwards, he went to Patna, went to Aligarh also, so many universities for convocation addresses. The theme was to talk about how India has been deprived by Indians themselves plus by the British. So he said we faced double deprivation. We deprived our own people of their rights, and the British came and made it worse. So that is a double challenge before us. So these were challenges which Maulana as a minister had to face, and which he tried to do as much as he could. And obviously lots of things were left behind and which were taken up later on. But these are few challenges which one can talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking us through your contents of the book and also touching upon various issues that are concerned with. So we can have a small question and answer session over here. Yeah.
Sir, what if you
Yeah.
that considering these political leaders, like these political leaders are forefathers, how they have, they have their own political ideology, so which is derived from a certain context, right? But it also has a normative and universal kind of aspect to it as well. So if you put these leaders, Maulana Azad and Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, all these leaders, and put them, let's say, in 2020, not the pandemic yet, exclude the pandemic, but in the current context, to maybe form a constitution or maybe form a structure like that, addressing modern issues such as the discrimination against transgender people or LGBT issues, or all these modern issues that we face today. How in this current society, this current setup, how a constitution would look up, or how these leaders in their universal aspects of their ideologies over that, how will they address these challenges? Can you have an answer to that?
So actually in history you don't raise questions that way. But these are very hypothetical questions. Like how would these people have reacted? Obviously they would have reacted according to the times they were living in. No? So you will find a difference between how Nehru will react and how Maulana Azad will react, or Sardar Patel will react. So they will not have one reaction. They will have reactions in differently, because they were all very, like I say it many times, they were all thinking people. They were not pygmies of today in any political party. Today, in any political party, you just can't compare. They were all thinking people, erudite people, but they represented their period. Like this whole issue, LGBTQ you are talking about today, was not an issue in those times at all. It's an issue today. And not only today, it is an issue over the last 15, 20 years. Before that, we didn't even know that there is an issue, something like this. So you can't telescope your concerns of today into the past, which was so different. Yeah.
Obviously, their ideas come from a context.
Yeah.
But their ideas have a universal aspect as well. Example, believe in equality in a certain context, right? How would that take into consideration? Like, would them, if you see them reacting in a particular direction, or would they have their own reservations? How does that react? Because these are individuals who are participating in video. I get the fact that their knowledge and idea come from a certain context, but I'm not asking to change that context. I'm saying that if
take these ideas and universal concept, how do they apply it to other issues which face us? Can they be a like guiding inspiration of something?
Some of them can be, like, for example, Nehru. Nehru can be, because he was a man who was exposed not only to India, he was exposed to the global changes in his times. So one can see that issues like this, somebody like Nehru would react. But I don't think Maulana Azad would react exactly the same way. Maybe he will not react at all. Maybe he will react adversely. You know? Or Sardar Patel may have different ideas, or may have no ideas at all on this issue. But Nehru will certainly have an idea, because he belonged to a generation of people who were trained to think little differently in his own times, despite the context I'm talking about. But other people, like for example Gandhi, how will Gandhi react? Gandhi is somebody who was the most honest person, who will speak the truth, whatever he felt like, you may like it or not. He would have certainly reacted. And I'm sure he would have reacted in favor of the cause, because the sort of man he was, the sort of reactions we see in Gandhi's writings, he would have certainly come out in favor of the issue. But I'm not sure of Sardar Patel and Maulana Azad. So they may have taken a different position, maybe may have disagreed. Yeah.
I would like to first thank you to find the time and come to Nalsar, and it was an absolute pleasure to see an enlightened person speaking about the life and times of another enlightened person. More particularly, what interested me was your observations on how it was a reflection of the creation of Pakistan was a reflection of the interests of the privileged class of Muslims. And you also spoke about your personal experiences interviewing certain people who are not a part of that privileged class. But how would you explain the fact that in the 1946 provincial elections, out of the 492 Muslim seats, 429 went to the Muslim League, which is a 87%. The only aberration to this trend was in the northwestern frontier province, where we had Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan advocating for a unified India. So if it really was just a privileged expression of interest, then why did a thumping majority of Muslims vote for Muslims?
See, this is a question which people raise, but people forget. Do you know about the franchise? Who were given the right to vote? A large section of population, not Muslims, large section of Hindus as well, were out of this ambit of people who will vote. So when we talk about people, and when I talk about those people who are not privileged, they were not privileged to go and cast their vote. So they had no voice. So when you see a large number of Muslim majority areas being won by the Muslim League, it's all because a privileged section voted for them, because they had the right to vote. Others had no right to vote. There was no universal franchise, which came to us only after independence. So this is a fact which people forget and unnecessarily try to quote. You are not wrong, Malapi. That's the impression you'll get. But the fact is that a huge section of people had no right to vote. How will they vote? Yeah.
The biggest mistake of my life was giving up presidency in 1946. He was trying to say that that would have changed the history of India, in the sense if he did not propose Nehru as his successor, or even if he had proposed Patel as president. These are the three important mistakes that he made, which actually, no, but there are a lot of people who disagree with that, and I know that also. But why does he, I think that part is also hidden for almost 30 years and then published.
I think, see, this is, and I've talked about it elsewhere as well. This India with Freedom is a book not written by Maulana Azad. It's a book dictated by Maulana Azad to somebody as erudite and as important as Humayun Kabir, who was a novelist, who had a strong opinion on so many things, on education, on politics, on literature, all sorts of things. Now, when you read this book and you read Humayun Kabir elsewhere, his own writings, I don't know how many people do that, but I have tried to do it. In India with Freedom, you don't know how much is Humayun Kabir and how much is Maulana Azad here. No? So, and lots of other people have raised questions about it. Because a translator is somebody else. If somebody is an expert in language, he takes dictation from somebody, like Maulana Azad is dictating to someone who knew English and who could translate whatever he was speaking into English. That was fine. But here he was talking to someone who has a strong opinion. He was a man with a lot of ideas. He was an important figure. And so you don't know what exactly. That's why Maulana Azad's own writings, except for Gubare Khatir, which he wrote himself, there is no other writing on which you can rely. You can rely on his newspaper clippings, writings, Al-Hilal, Al-Balagh, so many other articles he wrote, so many papers, fine. And Gubare Khatir, which he wrote from a prison himself. Rest of the things, 3 or 4, like one is India with Freedom, another is Azad Ki Kahani, Azad Ki Zubani, which was Abdul Khalik Mali Abadi, who actually wrote it after Maulana died without Maulana's permission. Third is Tazkira, which was written by Maulana Fazluddin, who was a friend of Maulana Azad. Again, the text was not shown to Maulana Azad. Maulana Azad was very angry. And it was published without his permission. Finally, Maulana died, but it came out. So not that whatever he has written over there is wrong, but there are lots of things which one cannot believe. So when I write a book, I have to rely on multiple sources to confirm whether anything being said is really true. So you have to use multiple sources to this is actually should be a style of any serious researcher, and people do this. So you can't believe one source, you have to really use multiple sources to confirm whether whatever has been said is true. So many things which Maulana has said, maybe I'm not saying that what you have said has been said by Humayun Kabir. Maulana's own perception can be wrong. And he was wrong on so many issues. And I have questioned in this book. For me, it's not in hagiography. I have questioned him, like he has, in some place he says that Muslims have to be the interpreters of their own faith. They should not believe, go by the word of the mullah. Now, how can you practically, how is it possible? Maulana Azad, being a scholar himself, belonging to a family of scholars, Arabic as his mother tongue, with all the scholarship behind him, could do this, dispense with mullahs. But a lay believer who has no idea, who actually memorizes Quran without understanding what he is memorizing, 90% people don't even know what they read during the namaz, because they know hardly Arabic. It is a ritual. So you actually create Hafiz the Quran, people who memorize Quran, not alim Quran, who know Quran, because you don't know the language. So this is a serious problem.
No, Ram Manohar Lohia,
Yeah.
in Guilty Men of Partition,
Yeah.
does make all these charges against Maulana Azad in this, about this book, and the influence of Humayun Kabir, and more than him, influence of Nehru. And he is so critical of Azad about the way that he treated Abdul Ghaffar Khan and no, especially and other co-Muslims, and also the reasons that led for partition. He was an eyewitness for what had happened in CWC meeting in 1946, June 10th. Azad did not say a single word against partition. And this book is, Lohia clearly says that, under the influence of Nehru, this was written by Kabir.
That is Ramana Lohia's prejudice against Nehru.
It's possible.
You can,
It's possible.
Read Lohia's speeches in other context, not in this context. Read other speeches. Lohia is so critical of Nehru on
Of
so many
course, of
counts
course.
all the time.
Yes.
And that is why Lohia's progeny, the socialists whom he has left behind, who are different versions of Lohiites.
I'm very interested in one thing, sir. His perception of the ground, reasons that led for partition is very, very narrow in the sense that he goes on this hagiography that Mountbatten. It all began in 46. Lady Mountbatten. This whole hagiography actually he carried. This book carries that, with which he does agree. Lohia disagrees and says that the seeds for partition began in 1940, with which Azad seems to just doesn't have a clue about in this book. While suspecting that who has written this, still he says these things.
See, for me, the seeds of partition didn't begin in 1940. They began in 1905. Because partition of Bengal was an experiment in partition. In 1905, partition of Bengal takes place. 1906, Muslim League is founded in Bengal. All the elite from Agha to so many other zamindars, they all joined together. The British patronage of Muslim League begins in 1906, continues till 1947. So, and you look at the whole history and look at the whole period. You will not find a single instance where the British talk critically of either Jinnah or Muslim League. Jinnah becomes important to Muslim League only in 1930s. Jinnah till 1920s was actually dilly-dallying. He was part of the Congress also. Jinnah began his politics as ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. That's what Sarojini Naidu called him. He was one of the most popular Congress leaders in Bombay, who attracted largest number of youth when he used to speak. So from there, he came down to a divisive Jinnah. He actually left India, went to England. The Muslim League leaders went to England, brought him back. They had come back, we need you. Because Muslim League was in a terrible shape. They didn't know where to go. They needed somebody else powerful and strong and articulate and good at debate like Jinnah, who was brought back by them. So this is something, and then see, I don't believe in blaming one or two or three people. Partition was a long project. It happened long ago. Gradually, it continued. There are so many participants in that. Hindu communalists, Muslim communalists, and people who are not communal also, they were also somehow became part of it. So partition happened because of so many reasons. So we keep fixing responsibilities according to our current political issues, concerns. I don't want to do that. I want to see it as a collective failure of large number of people, things they should have avoided, which they didn't avoid. No, that is absolutely. Read Patel. Read Patel. 1949. Patel goes to Madras, gives a public speech, which I've used in my nationalism volume, and he says many things regarding partition. He says, I take responsibility of partition. I agreed to the idea of partition because there was no choice. Partition was the only choice. Blame me or do whatever you want to do, but I take full responsibility that we had no choice left. we had to divide the country because the situation had been like that. So he's public. He's talking publicly about it. So there is no question of blaming anybody for that matter. People actually are publicly talking about it. Maulana Azad is speaking in a different voice from Jama Masjid. In 1946, the famous speech. So same man is talking about telling Muslims why you want to go away. This is your country. This is where your ancestors are buried. This is where you made home. This is where you came 1,000 years ago. Where are you? Where are you going? Why are you going? So these are all issues which we can continue to debate, and we should debate, of course. And this is how history should be read. But I think fixing blames makes no sense, because we should not fix blames on 1, 2, or 3 people, or Patel, or Azad, or Nehru, or Gandhi. They are all party to it. They are all were part of the whole politics which happened. They all failed together. If we call they failed, because it was a collective failure, and I think a necessary failure. I believe today, retrospectively, if you see, good actually we divided. It was impossible to keep the section which is Pakistan today with us. What would have happened had India and Pakistan been together? Afghanistan and Taliban would have been our neighbors. Today there is a distance between the two, at least, and whatever is happening in Pakistan would have continued to happen like that, maybe in a different way, but some mess would have been there surely.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
If Maulana Azad was not just a Congress showboy, why did not the Indian National Congress accommodate his demands? For example, in his India Wins Freedom, there are certain instances where he complains to Nehru about Sardar Patel's indifference towards Muslims during partition, of course. And then even Nehru doesn't listen to him. Then he goes to Gandhi, for example. He tells Gandhi all these instances, whatever is happening to Muslims. For example, he also notes that South Indian, army men from South India had been brought to Delhi so that communal tensions could be lessened, but it turned opposite. Even they, even they could not control it. Then second observation is that during the at the conclusion of the Constituent Assembly debates, for example, there was this. He wanted something of proportional representation for Muslims, but he could not get that. And towards, during the assembly debates also, towards the end only, he did not remain an active participant. He did not remain the ambitious man that he was. Why was that? Why was it hard for Congress to accommodate such demands? Second is an observation that once we make profiles of these people, of these giants, we often forget what happens to, for example, during this period only, when Patel, Gandhi, Nehru, they were all playing their roles. Muslims in Jammu were butchered. They were being massacred. So it did not make a national news. The news did not travel here. Even today, it's hidden from the public view. So I think once we make these profiles, we could also critically look at these things as well. Why they did not react to such things. For example, recently when Sheikh Abdullah's, when we make Sheikh Abdullah's profile now, we critically we look at it. We say that he was someone responsible for Muslim killings in Jammu, because he also said that because Muslims from Jammu don't vote for me, I will not come to their help. So it goes like that. This indifference, we cultivate this indifference. So, if there is something on that.
See, Jammu part is very different from what I am talking about. That is a different sort of politics at a different level. One can have a discussion on that separately. But when you talk about 1946, Maulana Azad's disenchantment with what was happening in India, that's a fact. That's not actually a failure of Maulana Azad. That is something which he is not happy about, because he's someone, I see it actually positively. He's someone who spent all his life writing, talking about Hindu-Muslim unity, love and empathy, fought against Muslim League, was derided by Jinnah all his life. Now partition takes place, communal riots take place, where Muslims are suffering. He is watching them suffer. Obviously, he is raising those issues with Sardar Patel. Sardar Patel somehow had his own compulsions. Oh, I don't know what were they. One can always discuss that. Nehru had his own limitations. You see, one need to go back to the period. What was that India? It was not an India we are living in today. No, that India was where families were displaced, huge section of population was massacred, was rendered homeless, some here, some across the border. So across the border, we were not concerned about, but the people who were suffering here in our own country, which was India, obviously we had to see what was happening in Delhi. Delhi, again, large number of Muslims who were living here were at the mercy of all those people who came from across the border. They came with a lot of anger. They came with a lot of anger because they had suffered. They have lost whatever they had. Obviously, that was something which, not that everybody who came from across the border was angry. No, there were people like Kuldeep Nair, there were people like Balraj Sahni, there were people like so many such people who came from, and these are big names. There are smaller names also, about whom we don't know. But a huge section of population was a section of ordinary people with normal sentiments. So obviously they had that grudge. There are lots of people who came from across the border who carry that grudge even now. If you meet them and talk to them. So what was happening in 46 was something which obviously Maulana Azad wouldn't have liked to see happen. Nehru actually went into the field, went among the people, talked to them, talked about peace, etc. But there were lots of limitations during that period. And those limitations we should keep in mind. And Sardar Patel's politics, whatever he was trying to do, he was actually very old at that time. He was very sick also. He died in 1950 and he was a heart patient. He was given responsibility of the Home Minister. We keep talking about Nehru as Prime Minister. We don't even bother that the man could not even run his home ministry properly because his health was so bad. He was a heart patient who could survive more than 2.5 years and died. So these were issues which are practical issues which we have to keep in mind. Today, very comfortably, we can talk about in retrospective that whatever happened was wrong and it shouldn't have happened that way. We have a right to do that, but we also should have concerns about the context, about the period, about the time we were talking about which we are talking about, the concerns of the people who came from across the border. You see, when you see Pakistan, look at the people who went from here to Pakistan. They were called Muhajirs. The people who came from there to India were called Sharanarthi. Sharanarthi. People who have taken Sharan in India. And for years they were called Sharanarthi. I know I belong to Meerut, and Hassanapur is one town which is a refugee town where you have Punjabi Sharanarthis, Burmese immigrants, Bengali immigrants, and Sindhi immigrants. That whole area was assigned, designated by the government in 1950s, 1960s for displaced people. So these Sharanarthis who came, they did small work, Punjabi Sharanarthis. Today, they are actually ruling that area. Similarly, in Delhi, the same Sharanarthi who was identified as a refugee today is actually is a true Delhiwala. The original Delhiwalas you can't find. What happened to the Muhajirs in Pakistan? They are still Muhajirs. They have to form a party of Muhajirs to defend their rights in the middle of Sindhis and Punjabis. And the leader of their party lives in London. He can't even live in Karachi. So this is the difference. Our Sharnarthis have become Indians today. We can't even make a difference. So that, yeah.
I completely understand your point that there was no universal adult franchise at that time. But and to predict what Muslims would have done had there been adult franchise is something that lies in the realm of conjecture. But we have two comparative data sets, and the first is the 1937 provincial elections. At that time, the coverage of franchise was around 1/10 of the entire population, and that increased to a quarter of the population in 1946. So if the privileged Muslim hypothesis were to hold true, then the vote share of the Muslim League should have decreased. But it didn't decrease, but it increased by a significant amount. So I still can't come to accept the fact that it was just driven by the privileged.
Maybe true. I don't completely disagree with your this thing, but the point is, I go by the demography. Now, why a large section of population, despite the franchise, etc., decided to stay back. No, and a huge number of people who decided to stay back and continue to be here, and the families I was talking about, they never went, they never left India. They opted for India as their home, despite the franchise and the voting and etc. So you may be true on that. So I have no disagreement.
Sir, did our forefathers, these leaders, ever oversaw that a possibility of a Hindu majoritarian extremist threat, which can create this secular model which they are pushing? Did they ever see a threat like this in India, which we see right now? Did our forefathers, all these, did they see a threat like this ever emerging?
I don't think so. I don't think they always had fears because in 1947, when the partition took place, there was a huge section of our Hindu Mahasabha leaders who put pressure on Patel, Gandhi and Nehru that India should be declared a Hindu nation because Pakistan has already decided to be an Islamic nation, to which all of them reacted that then what is the difference between Muslim League and us? No? We fought against them, against that idea of two-nation theory. We don't believe in that. No? We always believe that India is for all. So if Pakistan becomes an Islamic nation, then we becoming Hindu nation, then what is the difference between us? Why did we fight all these years? So there was a section who had this feeling in 1947 itself, and people like Nehru and even other leaders were conscious of their existence, that there is a section of our population which will raise this demand again and again, which they kept on raising. Sardar Patel in 1949 in a speech very clearly says, naming RSS, that forget about the idea of Hindu Rashtra. That is not conceivable. We will not become Hindu Rashtra. This is Patel as a Home Minister. And he goes further, he says, stop playing bullying tactics. He's addressing RSS. Stop playing bullying tactics. Start respecting national flag. This is Sardar Patel telling them, which means he knew that they don't respect national flag. As a Home Minister, he's saying, don't indulge in duplicity. This will not work. to say something and do something else. Stop that. I will not accept it. This is Sardar Patel. Go and read my book. I have used it in my nationalism book, that speech. Yeah, you will find it here. So these are things which all these people were aware of, the dangers of the. Now, how it will happen in 2022, 23 or 2014, that obviously nobody could predict.
Okay, so this was the last question. So I think we can now wrap up with the session, and thank you everybody who has been here and all those who have joined online as well. Thank you so much.